down for all these titles was not a simple feat. So thank you for your patience on this one. It happened to have fallen into my lap pretty easily tonight. I was tucking my daughter into bed a little on the later side of things. I don't recommend that. That's not. She was asking me where I was going, so I said I was going to shul, and we were going to talk about healthy eating. And I rarely have these kind of opportunity moments where business and child rearing collide in such a profound way. So I said to her, "What's your favorite food?" And it just dawned on me. I'd never asked her what her favorite food was. So she thought for a second and she said, "Chicken." I said, "Okay. So what's your second favorite food?" And she said, "Cucumbers." I think, "Okay. Like, what's your third favorite food?" "Peppers." I said, "What's your fourth favorite food?" She's like, "Chicken nuggets." I'm like, okay, and we're back at full circle. We're back to number one again. And no candy. So I bring it up because you would imagine that given her answers that my house must only be filled with chicken nuggets, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes. That was in there also, that was in the lineup. That's what my house would be filled with. But anybody who's been to my home can safely attest that there are cucumbers and peppers and chicken nuggets, but there are also two different types of cookies on the counter and cookies in the freezer, and candy abound. And so I say this and give this lecture over really preaching what I practice, practicing what I preach in both ways. I believe in it, and I'm only 3.5 years in, so this could totally blow up in my face around year 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. But so far, it seems to be going pretty well. And so, I come at this with the angle of what do we hope for our kids? We hope our kids in the big picture, forget about eating, forget about food. We hope that our kids are kind, at least I hope that my children are kind, thoughtful, God-fearing, God-loving, good human beings that are thoughtful, that think about things, that are engaged in the world, that are curious, and that know how to monitor themselves, that they're good monitors. They know when they're ready to take on the next task. They know when they need to hold themselves back from taking on the next task. And I think the most simple way to think about it, I think the number one piece that we come back to is, I think, the most famous study, which is my favorite study, and it's now become like the study du jour that everybody's quoting. It's originally, it's called the marshmallow study, for anybody who's familiar with it. And the marshmallow study was done originally in 1970 in Stanford. What's his name? Michel. And it's the best study. What he did back in 1970, they subsequently have replicated this study over and over and over again, is basically they said to a child that if a child comes in and sits down at the table, and they tell the child, you have a choice. You can either eat this one marshmallow now, it's pretty good, you can eat it right now, or you can wait. And when I come back, if you haven't eaten that first marshmallow, I'll give you 2. So they have the child repeat the instructions back to him. Do you have the instructions straight? Eat one now, get 2 when I come back, for a determined period of time. And it's fascinating to actually watch. You can now go on and watch the different studies that they subsequently have done to replicate it. The original study, you see the kids doing all sorts of crazy things. One kid puts it in his mouth and just lets it sit there. And then when the guy comes back in, he takes it out of his mouth. He's like, see, it's still here, as it's like half melted. Another kid basically kind of goes like this, like turns his head, like is not looking at it. What they found was, the results of it were much more fascinating. What they found, and we're trying to test, was what is self-control? What is this ability to regulate, to decide whether or not you're going to have something or not have something, to delay gratification, to not need something in the moment right now, to know that holding off and waiting is the better route. What's the impact of that in the long-term study? And what they were able to do with this study, for a whole variety of reasons, partially because he had an 8-year-old daughter who was following along with the study, was that they were able to do this longitudinally. And what they found was that as they followed these kids over the years, these children overall, the kids who were able to hold off and wait for that second marshmallow, overall did much better in life. They were more successful, they had happier marriages, they had higher SAT scores for whatever that's worth. They had more successful careers. They were just overall more regulated human beings. And it opened up this whole Pandora's box more recently about what does it mean to have the ability to delay gratification. When the study was originally done in 1970 and then follow-up studies, I think it was done 80, 88, 90, they just redid it again in 2004, 2000 I think, and then 2004. What they basically came back recently and said was by a guy named David Walsh. He has written a bunch of fabulous books. I put one of his books down here, which is Smart Parenting, Smarter Kids. He also wrote another book. I'll give my father credit for this. He told me to read this many moons ago before I had kids. I think before I was even married. I was like starting graduate school. He's like, this is a good book. Whenever, just for life, and then once you get married, once you become a parent, it's called Know, Why Parents Have to Say It, Why Kids Need to Hear It. He's just a really fascinating, smart, thoughtful guy. And he basically looked at the study and said, you know, it's really great that people who delay gratification do better in life, but the bigger question is, how do we train people who don't inherently delay gratification? Is it something that you just have, or is it something that you can learn? And in fact, what they looked at more recently in 2011, they looked at brain imagery studies, and they found that the kids who could delay gratification, their delayed gratification areas in their brain lit up, and the kids who couldn't hold off, they needed that marshmallow, they needed it right now, and they could not wait, their areas of brain addiction lighted up a little bit. This is a very fascinating study to think about something that is so simple, but really so huge, the ability to delay gratification and the impact it has going forward into adulthood. And so now what we're thinking about is, how do we teach children how to delay gratification? And I say that and bring that up in this context and as a starting point for this larger discussion, because one of the more fascinating studies that I just saw, and I think it was a study in 2011, I think I put it at the end. Yeah, it's number 9. I can't even print, Tsukiyama, I apologize. It's a new study in 2010, and what she found that was so fascinating was that the ability to delay gratification, the ability to have a certain amount of self-control, was a huge predictor in healthy eating, bringing it back to topic. So not only was the ability of delayed gratification really important when it comes to education, and when it comes to being a student, and when it comes to being a spouse, and when it comes to being a person in the world, it also impacts the ability to regulate what we eat. And that's kind of how I think about this idea of eating. It's regulating, it's delaying gratification, and it's also about knowing how you're feeling on the inside. So when I think about the happy medium ideal, what does it look like? That's where I kind of start off. My starting off point is the kid who can modulate themselves, and that goes to modulating their emotions, modulating how they function in the world, modulating how they're feeling at the moment, and being able to maneuver the world in a really thoughtful way that's not impulsive. The opposite of delayed gratification is impulsive. And so I often do this every now and then with my kid. I'm like, here are 2 marshmallows. I'm like, do you want 1? Do you want 2? I think I tried it, she was like, must have been a year and a half old. And she totally failed. I mean, totally failed. I looked at my husband, I'm like, oh no. And then I realized you can't do it till they're 4. But every now and then we'll have these moments, I'll be like, is she delaying gratification? But I think it's really, and it's kind of this very humorous moment where we're watching them kind of maneuver the world. But I think it's a really important skill. And I think now, knowing what we know, that it's not always about the inherent thing, it's about teaching children. I think it's an important thing to put in people's back pocket, how we're teaching our kids how to modulate, how to delay gratification. And I always think about the fact that if you think about it from a Jewish perspective, this is completely in line. From a theological perspective, I always think of the Rambam whenever I give this talk, because it's really just about trying to hold the middle ground, not holding either extreme. It's really holding the mainstream. And a theme I'll come back to a lot is our children follow our lead. So if we're not holding the middle ground, if we're holding either extreme, they're gonna follow that lead. So the same is true of anything, but it's also true of food. And so just now going back to the topic of happy, medium, ideal, what does it look like? What it really looks like is a 4-year-old. And that's what the studies show, is before 4 and 5 years old, the research shows really thoughtfully and really intensely, and really in a number of different researchers over and over and over again, all comment that before the age of 5, children self-regulate. This is the parent's worst fear. You know, the kid says, I'm not hungry. And you're like, yes, you are. It's 5:30. You are hungry. And the kid's looking at you, no, I'm not hungry. And now we are in like the parenting conundrum moment. Do you force your kid to finish what's on the plate, or do you trust that your kid knows how to feed themselves? So as parents, we say, you gotta be kidding me. I'm gonna trust my 5-year-old. Like, there's something about this sounds totally bizarre. You know, I'm the parent. I know whether or not my kid is hungry or not. But kind of you don't know, because you're not in their body. And they actually, especially prior to the age of 5, have really good sense of their hunger cues. So if you ever talk to a pediatrician, one pediatrician said to me, 1 good meal a week. That seemed a little frightening. Or someone else said to me, 1 good meal a day. And the truth of the matter is if you watch kids really navigate through the world, little kids, we haven't gone past the 5-year mark, but if you watch 5-year-olds, they really feed themselves. They're really, really in touch with how hungry they are and how full they are. And so one of the things we want to be feeding back to them is when they say to you, I'm really hungry, what you want to say back to them is not, are you sure? Do you need this? Or I'm really full. Are you sure you want that other piece of chicken? You sure you're full? You want to be able to say back to them, you know, that's really great that you're following your hunger cues, and it's not the natural thing that comes out of our mouth, particularly not amongst anxious Jewish mothers who are nervous that their kids are going to go hungry. That's not the natural thing out of our mouths. But it is about following their hunger cues. The piece that becomes extraordinarily sticky that I want to add into the mix here a little bit, and everyone should just, people who weren't here last time should just know everyone can stop me in the middle. I love questions. It kind of fuels people, it's on people's minds and what people are curious and want to hear about, and gets the conversation going in lots of good ways. So one of the things that we aren't accounting for is 2 things. What happens after the age of 5? In other words, what happens because there's a real drop off after the age of 5, for some reason it seems to be that children have a much harder time regulating their hunger cues, when they're hungry, when they're full. But one of the things that they did find in a study was that when they looked at kids who could eat as much as they want, and they let the kids and then offered them a full meal and then offered them a snack afterwards. The kids who followed their hunger cues and said they were full and they didn't want anything more to eat, and they compared them to kids who ate the meal, said they were hungry, and then ate a lot more snacks. One of the differentiating pieces between the two of them had to do with parental modeling and parental restriction, in terms of how we're involved in rearing our children and modeling our children's and modifying our children's eating habits in terms of restricting food, particularly in the younger years, and then as they get older, seems to really shift how kids modulate their own food. In other words, we have this very powerful moment and ability as parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, however you're involved in children's lives, aunts, uncles, to really impact how children experience food by, first of all, our own experience of food itself, in other words, how we feel about food, and then in addition to that, our anxiety about what could happen to our kids. Because I think that's fueling a lot of the anxiety these days. We know that the obesity rates are really high, and we know that the anorexia rates are really high, and we're all trying to strike the balance of how to make our kid a healthy kid. And a healthy kid looks like a kid that eats the rainbow, quote unquote, exercises normatively, is an active kid, and is a normal weight. Being on either side of the spectrum is not a sign of health. Being a normal, healthy weight is a sign of health. And so we kind of are worried about how our kids are going to strike that balance. And so, you know, we're kind of juggling that piece. So they're naturally going to do it if we don't mess with it. But as a result of being people, we tend to mess with it. And there are lots of different ways that parents start to alter and interact and get involved in food that can really create some bad dynamics. So that's why I wrote deregulating the regulated child, creating food issues. So I just want to make a caveat that, when I say restricting food, that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. I usually get that. Like, does that mean that my kid, can wake up at midnight and ask for cookies and they can have cookies? No, that's insane. That's not what we're talking about. I think there's a balance between restriction and structure. Kids need structure, whether that's structured sleep, whether it's structured play, whatever that structure looks like and schedule looks like, kids thrive on that. It helps them feel like somebody's in charge. It makes them feel safe. Makes them feel like there's a schedule and a routine to their day, and it allows them a real strong sense of stability. And that's true with food also. And that does mean offering lots of different types of foods, and it does mean that there are rules and regs. In other words, it could be that there's between 4 o'clock and 5:30 there's no food because dinner's coming and you want them to be in touch with their hunger cues. But it also means that at 3 o'clock it might be okay to let them choose a snack and hold back that moment of anxiety. And you got to remember that the same kid if you let them be, I think it's the greatest fear, that if you let them be, one day a kid will choose a cookie and the other day a kid will ask for an apple. I promise you, and people don't believe me on this one, and I am watching it to be true that when you let kids have a little bit of everything, and it's not just my own anecdotal evidence, the research is showing it also. The research is showing so strongly that when you restrict food, that the majority of kids who experience restriction in food, in other words, there are foods that are totally off limits, those are the kids that are binging. I see it in my practice, but more importantly, we see it in the research. It's just, there's very strong evidence in the research. There's evidence about kids who diet. There's evidence about houses that are extraordinarily restrictive. That is really what creates a real intense amount of binge eaters. And it's a hard one for parents. It's a really hard one because I think it pulls for a fear dynamic, which is if you have all this in the house, how will they ever stop? How will they ever say no? But I see it amongst the kid who has 0 lollipops in the house, and then I've heard stories of kids rummaging through garbage cans looking for lollipops, or someone told me that they told a kid that a lollipop's not kosher, and then they see other kids walking around with lollipops and they're totally confused because, well, I'm Jewish and he's Jewish and I keep kosher and I thought they keep kosher, but how come they get a lollipop? And of course their whole world is coming crashing down. And also it creates think about that dynamic it creates. That kid really wants a lollipop, now it's not kosher. So now you're really setting off a whole religious dynamic that's about to start going on also. How do I get that not kosher thing? You could really kind of create a whole food nightmare in and of itself. Yeah.
Can I ask a personal question?
Absolutely.
I hide the Oreos for my son on top of the cabinet.
Yeah.
And then I have like 8 a night. Is that not parenting? But there are other cookies in the house.
Right. Are you hiding the Oreos because you want them yourself, or are you hiding them because you don't want him to have them?
I don't want to eat them.
Why?
They're not healthy.
Why? Play it out.
Because he's going to eat a lot of Oreos, like I eat a lot of
Okay. How old is your kid?
3.
So this is the moment, right? I think every parent, in all honesty, has been there, and I think if we're all honest, we've all kind of had this moment. Let me hide the donuts or hide the Oreo cookies. Look, this goes back to the research, and what the research shows is that when the kid goes to your parents' house and discovers that there is something called Oreos in the world that they've never been allowed to have in their house, they will hang out there, which may not be a bad thing because they're hanging out with their grandparents, but they're going to want that much more. And what they realize is they can't have it at their house. And so what you created is feast and famine. So when we go back to normative eating for a second, so one dynamic of normative eating is knowing that you can always have it again. Okay, you can always have it again. So I had a recovered client who probably had an eating disorder for upwards of 6 or 7 years, and probably in and out of treatment, in and out of 3 or 4 treatment facilities, intense treatment facilities, both anorexia and bulimia. And one of the biggest markers of her success, of her health, was when she had a birthday a couple of years ago, and she kept the cake, and she had one piece of cake on her birthday, and she came in and to therapy, and we were talking about this experience of eating this cake that she would do all sorts of crazy things with, either binge or chew and spit it out, all sorts of craziness. And she said to me, you know, I decided that I'm going to have one piece of cake on my birthday, and if I decided, and I really love the cake, like that was her family thing, they got to pick the cake that they get for their birthday. She said, I realized that if I want another piece tonight, I can have another piece tonight and it will be okay, because it's about moderation, and it's also about knowing that you can have it again. The binging, the feasting, comes from this feeling like you can never have it again. Why do people go crazy on Thanksgiving? I'm using that as just an example for 1 second. Because it's like supposed to be the best food of the year. It's like great turkey and great stuffing. Some people, I mean, if you love Thanksgiving food, then like it's like the best thing. And you don't get it. I mean, it's like food that is specific to this holiday. It is coming once a year. You will never see it again. And so people feel like they have to have tons of it. But that is inherently eating disorder, because the truth of the matter is that it will come again. Maybe it won't come again for another year, but it will come again. And it's the ability to go to the table, feel like you can have 1 or 2, and then know that you can have it again. So that's also why when we talk about healthy eating, so the short answer is it's a bad tree that you're barking up here a little bit, because one day will come, they'll realize that there are Oreos in the world, and they will feast on them instead of having 1 or 2. And so I do say, though, that it doesn't mean that you have, just because you have it available, just because you can have it, doesn't mean you can have an endless amount. It's important to teach kids, and this goes back to where we started in terms of self-control, and it goes back to delayed gratification, that you can have 1 and you can have 2, and then it was really delicious and it was really yummy, and you know what, we have it in our house, and if you're in the mood for it tomorrow, then you can have it again tomorrow, but that's enough for today. So you're balancing it out. You're kind of really balancing out their own intuitive eating, the fact that they're hungry for it, the fact that they want that, and at the same time, you're balancing it out, saying, it'll come again, you can delay your gratification, it was really yummy today, it'll be really yummy tomorrow, and you can wait. You can hold off and you can wait for it.
Isn't it also about building a trusting relationship with your child and believing that they could also trust their own internal signals of hunger?
So it is. That's why I said, you know, when you have these moments as a parent and say, like, how can I trust my 5-year-old that they're actually hungry? I think it's 100% true. I think for the most part that's true. That being said, I want to stipulate that and say, if you see a kid who is unable to regulate their hunger cues, then you do have to step in. And that's where we kind of we don't want to dysregulate children's hunger, but more often than not, it happens for a whole variety of reasons, and then you do want to step in, and you do want to help be the monitor of how kids go about eating, and then we want to talk about how you monitor food in a healthy way so that they're not having 10 Oreos, so that they're having 2 Oreos or 3 Oreos, and whatever the portion size is. And the same is true in the other direction. In other words, you see a kid who, you know, an anorexic person would say, I'm never hungry, I'm never hungry, I'm never hungry. Well, that's not following their hunger cues. That's having an eating disorder. So if you let them follow their hunger cues, you know, they'd wind up in a hospital or worse. So I think that it's a balancing act in terms of regulating our hunger cues. I think the hard part as a parent, particularly as kids grow and as kids develop, and, you know, when kids go out of the house, is knowing that they're going to follow their hunger cues. That's why I go back to the research. I think it was by Stice. He has a ton of good research on this. Fields has a ton of good research on it. Stice is not in here. There's this amazing book called I'm Like So Fat by Catherine Steiner-Adair. It's a brilliant book, and I rarely think everything in a book is brilliant, because it just is, you know, we all have our own personalities and our own biases. she's a brilliant clinician, she's a brilliant researcher, and it's a brilliant book. And she cites a lot of good research in here, she cites a lot of good tips, she cites a lot of good techniques, and she quotes Stice a lot, and I've seen a lot of his research as well. And he basically reiterates this point that the kids who follow their hunger cues in the home and out of the home, in other words, the kids who aren't binging, the kids who are going to their friend's house and eating how they would eat in your house, are kids who don't have restrictive eating habits at home in terms of food that's good or food that's bad, food that's healthy, food that's unhealthy, and have a wide variety of things that are available to them and open to them. Those kids do well inside your home and outside your home. So you develop that trust also based on what you're doing in your own home and knowing that they're going to be able to communicate about it later. And also always listening. I always, anytime you are dealing with kids, the most important thing is communication. So next week's body image, which I think is, an issue that's on people's mind in general, their own body image, their children's body image, how that gets transferred over from one person to another person. But I kind of always say this idea of communication. So you see a kid that's really upset, like really, really upset, and they kind of just tell you that they're upset, and you visibly see that they walk in the house. They're more of a teenager. They walk in the house, they're really annoyed, they slam the door, they throw things on the floor. That might just be a normal moment, but it also could be an annoyed moment. And they go for the refrigerator. That's a moment to stop. Right, that's a moment to stop. You look like you've been having a rough day. You don't have to say why you're going to the refrigerator. It could be, it looks like you're having a rough day. What's going on? What happened? And so in other words, it's not about the fact that they can't eat. It's about the fact that you're picking up on the fact that something actually more profound has happened during the day and they're about to emotionally eat. And you're kind of cutting it off at the pass. And instead of making it about using food in an emotional way, you're making it about a communicating opportunity and a communicating moment from parent to child. And that's true across the board. We started an attempt at a new thing in our house. It's about to get a little bit worse. Somebody said to me, I was telling it to Eitan, and he said, "Oh, we're gonna be that family." I ordered these chalkboards that you stick onto the wall, and I realized that kids naturally do not necessarily. I know this. I'm like, what did you do today? Nothing. Really? You were in school all day, you had a play date, like you did nothing. And then she tells me what she had for lunch. After about 3 minutes of this, she will tell me something that happened. Now it could be, so-and-so was really mean to me at school. But we're thinking about positive things. We're thinking about positive energy. We're thinking about delayed gratification. We're thinking about looking at the world in a positive light. And so we started one good thing that happened to everybody today. And putting it, it's going to go up on the chalkboard. It took me a while today. It was about 5 rounds of what did you do today till I got like the positive thing. And it involved me sharing a positive thing that happened also. In other words, we're fostering an environment where we're sharing, we're open, we're communicating it. And it's not easy. I think it's hard work because everybody's really busy and doing lots of things. But I think it goes back to this idea of communication. So a kid's hungry, a kid's full, communicating what does that fullness feel like, what does that hunger feel like, why they want that extra cookie, and taking it from there. I'm gonna move on to one thing, but I wanted to pause and see if there are any comments, questions, thoughts. There's 2 things, and they go back to back. This touches a little bit into next week's topic, but it's such an important one. I'd reiterate it twice, if not more. The deal with dieting. The research is really clear on this one. Dieting, every eating disorder starts with a diet. Not every diet turns into an eating disorder. And when there's a great presentation a professor of mine gave where she went through all the different diets that are out there, from Weight Watchers all the way to, South Beach, Atkins, you name it. But she starts off the slide looking at the number of people today that are dieting, the number of people that are watching, any euphemism that you could come up with to term dieting. And the number is something ridiculous. It's something like 95% of the country is dieting. And I want to take the term dieting and think about it in terms of healthy eating, because we're inundated in a world where I think healthy eating is hard. You know, we talk a lot about, they do a lot of really good research studies on portion control, on the importance of portion control, the importance of the fact that if you put a portion that's 2 times the amount of a normal portion size in front of you, people tend to eat it, and the importance of helping all of us eat more normative sizes. Obviously, Bloomberg's big initiative on the soda, I always feel like, why are we banning things? Nothing should be banned. And then I went to the movies and saw the size of sodas that he was talking about, and I too was a little bit shocked. It's pretty crazy when we think about what is a portion size and what is a plate actually supposed to look like. And people's lives are really busy. People are coming home at all sorts of hours, as I mentioned last week. So it's hard to have dinner, it's hard to not snack. And the hardest thing that you realize is that your kids are watching everything that you do, whether it's intentional modeling or unintentional modeling. And there's so much really fabulous research about the roles that mothers play on boys and the roles that mothers play on girls, whether that's how they perceive their own bodies, whether it's how mothers take a big hit on this one. I apologize. I always give that as a preface. Mothers in eating disorders do not do well. It's just they take a really bad beating. There's some new stuff that's trying to do work on dads and take them, to court on some of these stuff, but it's not very good research, so it's not going to do the trick. Mothers are still going to get slammed here. I think probably because mothers are doing more feeding, no matter what, than men. And I think that mothers send a lot of messages to kids, intentionally, unintentionally, but they're watching all the time. And so one of the things, there's 2 aspects to this really intense dynamic. One aspect of it is when parents are on diets, okay? And the other aspect is when parents think that putting children on diets is a good idea. So I can tell you that I have had, my original research was on binge eating, so I have binge eaters in my office, in my private practice, and I can tell you that they have memories, some really profound memories of being 6, 7, 8 years old and being dragged to any assortment of nutritionists and being put on diets at really young ages. And it always backfires. It always backfires because, in Israel, they have some convoluted phrase that sounds better in Hebrew, I'm sure, but it's called behind the curtain. You know that there's a better Hebrew phrase here for this. But basically, it's about the fact that when you want to make really good parenting household changes, when there's a kid who, for whatever reason, genetics, emotions, their own ability to regulate, for whatever reason, that is in reality more overweight. It does happen. There are children, every children's bodies are different. The question is, how do you deal with that? And I think everyone's thought is, well, we just got to restrict. And what that ends up happening is you end up getting either 2 things. Either you restrict just that kid's food, and now you've identified them as the kid with the problem, and so they now carry that around with them as the identified kid with the issue. Everybody else gets a cookie and they don't get a cookie, and what that experience is like. Or you restrict in the entire household and everybody knows that it's really just about that kid, and the restriction doesn't work, because it always backfires. And what ends up happening is when they're not looking, they're binging like crazy. When you're not looking, they're out. Whether it's at a friend's house, whether it's in the closet, whatever it is, they're binging. I see this with a parent who clearly cannot stand that their kid doesn't look like the quote-unquote thin ideal. This kid's food is completely dysregulated. She basically starves all day. And then the mother finds candy wrappers in her bedroom, tons and tons of candy wrappers in her bedroom. And she's an unhappy kid. I mean, she's truly an unhappy kid. And there's so many other issues going on. So this issue of identifying kids and making them dieters and making them go on a diet is bad from a perspective in terms of how they experience themselves. It's also bad because it doesn't work. The research shows that 9th graders who are put on a diet were 3 times more likely to be overweight in the long run, in the big picture. That somehow it backfires. The New York Times just did an article last week. Anyone see it? Anyone see it? New York Times? Yeah, you saw it. But they're looking at what's the truth on dieting. Does it really make you gain weight? They had this whole thing. If you yo-yo diet, you end up gaining the weight back plus 5 pounds. That's like the big classic phrase. And is that really true? The myth. So this guy basically is now going to go out and do like a big robust study about what are the real truths of dieting and not truths of dieting. You can take their little quiz on like NewYorkTimes.com, the health section. They have like a whole quiz on that. I think the only one that was true was that exercise helps to maintain weight. Which is true, and it actually is a really important part of a normal, healthy, balanced life, making sure that we're all active people, making sure that our families are active people. So, you know, but the real research on dieting really shows that the more that you diet, the more heavier you are. And in fact, I'm trying to think if I have my numbers here because I don't like to quote numbers that are not right. There was a 7-year follow-up study that said 4.3% of females and 2.3% of males that had gone on a diet younger than had started to binge eat, and 5.3% of females and 0.8% of males had started to purge had they been on a diet. Obviously, there's a relationship between mothers and eating disorders, which we can come back to in a second. But that's a pretty strong study in terms of the fact that whenever you have kids that are overweight and you try to put them on a diet, it always ends up being that they end up being more overweight. The dieting tends to backfire for a whole host of reasons, mostly because the kid feels like an identified patient, the kid feels like there's something wrong with them, and they feel restricted. This more often than not also tends to happen around puberty, right? So kids naturally gain weight around puberty. They're supposed to. Kids need fat to go through puberty. It just is one of those things in life. And parents tend to get very anxious. And so we always really try to tell parents, you've got to hang tight. Like, the story's not over. You've got to hang tight. You've got to watch them grow. And they're going to kind of, and if you hold pace, in other words, you keep doing what you're doing. You have good food available to them, healthy food, all sorts of foods, and you have a schedule and you have a routine. You're not a made-to-order cook. Nobody get me started on making 5 meals. Everybody should be making 1 meal, serving it, and if they eat it, they eat it, and if they don't, they don't. I do that about 80% of the time, 85% of the time. So I'll own up to, you know, our own parental moments. But you know, you hold strong with that, the kids tend to grow out of it. And it really does feed back into maternal anxiety, which I want to spend a little bit of the last 15 minutes talking about. No, go ahead.
Just like a quick thing. So relating to moms and also media, I've been speaking to 7th grade girls lately about the Special K commercials. I don't know if people have seen this, but like, there's a commercial now all about how, you know, like Special K is really healthy, right? And, you know, kind of like if you eat a diet that's low in fat or whatever, that you'll be healthy. So there's a little bit of that also, like in our culture, like it's always about health, but like I think it's important to be careful, careful about that. So this mom is like trying on her kid's jeans, and like the kid finds her, like her teenager, and she's like, "Mom, what are you doing? Are those my jeans?" I think that's also embedded in the culture.
That's the commercial?
Yeah. And then their slogan is, "What will you gain when you lose?" which I have trouble with. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of like what's out there in the media too, talking about, you know, moms and like how they're kind of portraying these things to their kids. I mean, it's just, yeah.
Right. The strongest motivator, and I want to kind of not save most of it for next week because I think it's a larger discussion in terms of how we help create children with good sense of body image and good sense of self. But you know, the strongest research shows that kids who are most at risk for eating disorders, whether that's obesity or binge eating, are particularly girls who perceive their parents or their mothers' importance on thinness. inaccurately or accurately. So it actually doesn't matter if they're correct. You may not actually be perceiving it, but their perception of how you view a thinness and what they're eating plays a huge role in their own ability in terms of how they're feeling about themselves, which gets into this whole added dimension in terms of mothers who are dieting. I feel comfortable saying this because I've said this in Teaneck, that I was once at a meal, a Shabbos meal, and nobody took dessert. No wife took dessert. No mother took dessert. And I'm happy to say I haven't seen that here, actually. And I was totally struck by it. I really was, because I think what's happening is that the kids, there's two ways to think about it. So when they looked at predictors of binge eating, particularly, and they were looking at it with intentional modeling and unintentional modeling with mothers. So obviously the things you would think about, criticism around body, comments around food, all of those were really strong predictors. Don't eat that, that has this in it. But the other thing that was really strong, obviously mothers who have eating disorders, obviously huge correlate, huge relationship between the two. But the other piece that was really strong was watching what mothers eat unintentionally, and knowing whether or not your mother is on a diet or not. So there's a couple of dynamics to that. One dynamic to that is there are mothers who are very conscious that they are not going to pass on their food anxieties to their kids. And that's a really good thing and a really strong thing. So even if you think you're faking it, keep faking it. It's okay. They can't see inside your heads. And really trying to know that you're mimicking those good behaviors. And the other thing is eating with your kids and really not dieting. I mean, it's a really hard one, but the truth of the matter is that is the way to go in life. In other words, the best way to maintain a really healthy weight is normative exercise and normative food. And that normative food is across the gamut. It's eating breakfast, it's having lunch, it's eating dinner, it's having snacks, it's sometimes having treats and sometimes not. It's figuring out how to kind of strike that perfect balance that everybody is not perfect with, but it really is important. And so the truth of the matter is that we all should be doing that naturally, and we should be modeling that to our kids. But for a whole host of reasons, we probably are amongst the camp of people who got dysregulated at some point in our lives. And so, maintaining that weight is really hard. And the truth of the matter is that when we talk about normative eating and healthy eating, the real thing is being able to maintain a weight. To the exclusion of major life circumstances, it's maintaining a weight plus or minus 5 pounds is really a good sign that you're in that framework of normative weight. That's to the exclusion of pregnancy, pre and post, but as a normal functioning of life. But the truth of the matter is that I think it's an interesting conversation to be had as well in terms of now just thinking about mothers and the modeling and parents and the modeling that we're doing to our kids. Because I hear a lot of people when they go into pregnancy mode that, okay, like total feast mode, like I can eat everything and I can eat anything. And that is really a setup for fasting post-pregnancy. And so again, what we're really modeling to our kids is that it doesn't matter, and there are times where I want to feast and I'm going to feast, and there are times where I'm going to fast and I need to fast, and that's really not a good model to be setting to our kids, and it's creating a bad dynamic for ourselves, it's creating a bad modeling dynamic, and I think it's a really important one to get out of. It's not about whatever stage of life you're in, it's about healthy eating and what that eating looks like. So it's just a really, I can't stress it enough, and I think part of the reason we're seeing a rise in eating disorders amongst post-childbearing women, so a lot of anorexia, a lot of bulimia in women in their 30s and 40s, and upwards, and I'm thinking as I'm talking that I wonder if that is a little bit of what's going on here, that women in their childbearing years feel like their body has totally been taken over. They've gone through this routine of feasting and fasting. I mean, I've heard it 100 times. I hear all the time, I'm pregnant, like I'm eating everything. Well, you should just be eating when you're hungry. Again, we're going back to this not normative eating. And then kind of coming off of that whole routine and feeling like their bodies have turned upside down, and then the, dysregulation that sets their bodies up for. I think these are challenges across the board, but I do think it's really about modeling. If you're giving your kids a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you can eat the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you're giving kids apples and peanut butter for snack, unless you're allergic, have some apples and peanut butter. It's a real hard one. And I think it's also important, though, on the flip side, is that talking to kids about the active lifestyles that you have. You're going to the gym, tell your kids you're going to the gym. And you can talk about how great it felt and how much energy you have. Again, it's how you phrase things. It's how you use the terminology. And I think this is all perfectly in line with Judaism, because we're just talking about maintaining the moderation. We're talking about following a norm, and we're following a normative lifestyle that kind of holds down the middle. But I can't stress enough this issue of mothers and dieting. I know it's a really, really prevalent one, and it's a really important one to catch and not fall into the trap of. The research is so profoundly against it. It's such a risk factor for eating disorders. It's such a risk factor for anorexia. It's such a risk factor for bulimia. It's such a risk factor for being overweight. And it's, more importantly, it's setting your kids up for that as well. So. And just being mindful of the words that you're using, like, oh, I gotta lose 5 pounds, or that's too fatty, or that's carbs. They're listening to everything you're saying, and sometimes we just say things and we're just not even paying attention to the fact that they're actually hearing it. We may not even be thinking that anybody's hearing it. We could just be talking to ourselves. But it's really getting in touch with everything that we're communicating, and everything that kids are picking up on, and everything that kids are hearing, and being really, really sensitive to that. Take a pause for a second. Questions, thoughts? Yeah.
Have you found, as in today, that the yeshivas are modifying their meal plans, lunch?
I can only speak for the schools that I see. I work at Ramaz. I think that they offer a whole variety of foods. I take a little bit of a radical position on this one, because look, you walk into a cafeteria and it's one meal a day that's not controlled by you. I just want to give that perspective. That means that there are 2 other meals and probably a snack or 2 in there that you are giving to your kids. Now, by all accounts, I would agree that having good, healthy options is important, but I also think that it's really okay for there to be macaroni and cheese at school lunches. I really believe it, because I think that there's no food that's off limits. I look at the Ramaz meal plan, and it's anything from macaroni and cheese to quesadillas to chicken it's a pretty well-balanced meal. They always have a vegetable, they always have a soup, they have a good salad bar. And I think that it goes back to this idea of trust, and I think it goes back to this idea of trusting your kid, that you're giving them lots of opportunities for good, healthy eating at home. You're modeling for them good, healthy foods that's a wide spectrum. And I think the hope is that if you've done it right, when they go to school, they're going to follow their hunger cues. They're going to have 1 serving of macaroni and cheese if it sounds good to them, and if it doesn't sound good to them, they'll make themselves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that's available to make. And they're going to have pizza, and they'll have a slice of pizza or 2, and then they'll come home and they'll either be more hungry or less hungry for dinner. I mean, I see it anecdotally. The research supports it, but I also see it anecdotally as well.
Okay, my daughter's a graduate of, I won't mention the school, Jewish day school, and I mean, I couldn't change what the meal plan is, but even what you're describing, the kids are given water, or they're giving sweet apple juice. Milk is there if you want, but if children naturally don't like these things, or they naturally, if you give kids, I don't care how well you train them at home, but if these are your choices, kids led to their own thinking are going to pick and choose however, and they might not necessarily take the healthiest of choices. Like you're saying, okay, let's say they like the macaroni and cheese, but school will let them take a second helping because, granted, they're hungry. I think the private schools have to do a bit of more rethinking. I know it's expensive to do, but there's got to be incorporating not frozen vegetables, real vegetables. It could be fresh food on a small level, but good quality that a child is going to want to eat. Having the choice is there, but it's not for the taste palate, doesn't do anyone any good.
Right. You're correct in the sense that it's important to have in my opinion, that it's important to have food that looks good and that kids want to eat, and that goes for macaroni and cheese and for fruits and vegetables as well. I think the piece that I just want to point out, which is that you're saying, I'm hoping that they make the healthy choice. And what I'm saying is that the kid could decide on Monday that they want chocolate milk with their food. And on Tuesday, they could decide that they want water. And on Wednesday, they might decide that they want apple juice. And that is a normative, healthy, overarching diet. And it's when we become anxious about never having chocolate milk in the house because they're going to go through the entire bottle, or never having apple juice in the house because they're going to have 4 cups of it, that actually creates a dynamic where they will have 4 cups of it instead of having it in the house and they have 1 cup of it and they've had enough of it. Because another way to think about it is the forbidden fruit, right? And so I think that it's a balancing act. Now, that being said, I'm the first person to say, you have an infant or a toddler, you don't need to give them apple juice. Water is a great, the elixir of life. I think it's a great choice. You don't necessarily have to volunteer that. But that being said, once a kid recognizes there's apple juice in the world, which is okay, it's not the end of the universe. 5 cups of apple juice is not great. But 1 cup of apple juice is nothing will happen. A little sugar on the teeth, some brushing of the teeth, probably a good idea. But again, I really think that the moderation piece is important, and I think helping kids to develop that moderation is the more important piece, because we will never be able to walk with them through life all the time. Look, I think if we all had our choice on some level, we want them to be independent, thriving people going through the world, making all the right choices. And at the same time, we also want to, if we're really honest with ourselves, we would like to be a little puppet sitting on their shoulders, like whispering like instructions into their ear every now and then, like be nicer, say please, say thank you, don't eat. There's this parenting moment where we want them to make the right decisions, and we also want to be there to make sure they're making the right decisions. But we're not. We're just not there all the time. And so the best thing that we can do is hopefully steer them in the right direction so that they're making the right decisions and that they can trust inside that they're making the right decisions. And so I think on some level, this is just a sampling of life. And sometimes they're going to make good decisions, sometimes they're not. But I think it's okay for there to be a whole variety of food in high schools. And I think that, I think it's an education piece that's more complicated. You're getting into costs and tuition and lots of complicated things that are way above my degree. But I think that that's where it gets a little complicated. And so I think it's okay. A kid comes home and has, the school I send my kid to gives them pancakes and waffles for lunch. I would personally probably not give my kid pancakes and waffles for lunch, but that's what she eats for lunch on Tuesday or something. What is it? Thursday. Thank you. And on Thursday night, she doesn't eat as much for dinner, and then I wonder why. She had a bajillion pancakes. But that's okay, because she had a lot for lunch and she's having less for dinner and she's following her hunger cues. So I think it's a sticky moment as a parent when we are realizing what these kids are eating. But I think that if we trust them a little bit, even though our anxiety doesn't want to trust them, I think it'll be okay. That being said, if you saw a kid who is struggling with weight issues, I wouldn't throw it back to the school lunch. I would more think what is going on with that kid, because really really intense overweight is usually a result of emotional eating, and so I would really think more about what's going on with that kid from an emotional perspective, than I would to think that they were eating too many unhealthy lunches at school, because the majority of kids, particularly in our private schools, are 80% are pretty normal weight. So that's my own reaction to that. I see a hand over here. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? No? So it's 9 o'clock, so I'm gonna stop. But I just I wanna just kind of anecdotally share a story. I have a client. She's lovely, really lovely client. She really came to me a huge mess, and by nothing that I've done, and more of the hard work that she has done. She's really, really put herself together. She's put herself through school. She put herself through graduate school. Came from in a family that is pretty rough, and she grew up where literally there was nothing to eat in the house. Like, it just was like the house was really controlled, and there was no food in the house. We're talking it was like vegetables and Cheerios, and everyone got one piece of chicken. And it wasn't financial induced, it was eating disorder induced. And she grew up with grandparents who would make really nasty comments about her body when she gained weight, when she lost weight. And for as far as she has come in all that she has done, her deepest struggle is her bulimia. She doesn't know how to eat. She truly just doesn't know how to eat, because she feels like every meal is her last meal. When there's food in front of her, she doesn't know how to stop. It's profoundly frightening. And that doesn't just go, by the way, for junk food. I had a client who binged on apples. I don't even know how many apples she ate a day. That was all she ate, and she ate apples by the barrel. And I've seen clients binge on frozen food. So when we think about it, we assume that it's just people are binging on the good foods of the universe, like the foods that you think you want to take away from your kid. But it's not that. It's this desire to just eat and never stop. I have, one client who she always binges in front of the TV. The two things she wasn't allowed to do growing up. She wasn't allowed to watch TV, and she wasn't allowed to eat junky food, quote unquote. And she eats junky food, like that, what she terms her junky food, and she watches TV. And so I think it's a hard one, but I think we all have to be mindful as parents, as children, as grandparents, as people in the world wandering through, that holding the middle ground is really the way to go on this one. It's trusting that your kids are going to follow your lead. It's trusting yourself that you're going to be a good parent today and a better parent tomorrow, and that you're just kind of going through it, and you're learning, and you're working hard, and you're trying to do the best that you can do, and trusting that you're good at it. We're not great at it, but we're good at it. And really just being so mindful of the messages we're giving over to our kids day in and day out, and taking care of ourselves. That's the last thing I would say. I think, we kind of go through this world, we're running ragged, we have 101 things going on, and our kids see that. And all those slips come out when we're tired and we're exhausted and we've lost our patience 5 times over, and we're frustrated with ourselves. And so it's really taking an opportunity and taking the time to take care of ourselves, feel good about ourselves, because our kids are going to pick up on that also. Our kids are going to take care of themselves when they see that we're taking care of ourselves, and making time for themselves when we're making time for ourselves, and not giving us a hard time, not feeling that pressure that we shouldn't take care of ourselves and feel good about ourselves. So that's my plug for good mothering. Thank you very much. I'll stick around for questions.
We have you one more time.
You have me one more time, yes.